Hi, everyone. We're going to get started with the next panel. So I'm Adam. I'm the Assistant Director of the MS Computational Design Practices Program, an adjunct here, and one of the co-organizers for this conference, so we're almost through the day. It's been so great that everyone joined today, and to share what some of the GSAPP faculty have been working on and hear from others outside as well. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our next panel, which is Spatial AI. This panel, like all the others, is framed around a framing question, and the one for this is, how will AI affect the relationship between designers and tools? And I'm so excited to have kind of this group of panelists here, which I think has a bunch of different ways of answering that. They're super fascinating through their design and pedagogical practices. And have so many takes on spatial design, computation, the degree to which spatial is programmable, already programmed, etc. So to introduce them briefly on this panel, we will have Taeyoung, who's an adjunct professor here at GSAPP, Jung, who is a computational designer at Google Delve, William Martin and Violet Whitney, who are co-founders of their spatial computation practice Spatial Pixel, and adjunct professors here as well, and Richard Tae, co-founder of transdisciplinary studio TheGreenEyl and assistant professor of interaction design at the New School. Yeah, really excited to see their work in this context and for the conversation afterwards. On that note, especially for the people that haven't been with us earlier today, I would just like to note that we have a kind of live question and comment system that one of our students, Howley, has built this week that we'll be using to take questions for the Q&A. And also just to collect your thoughts on the presentation and conversation in general. You can find a QR code and URL that will lead you to that, paste it all around the auditorium, and your questions will go up. I'll read from them, but even if I don't get to them, just note that we are keeping them afterwards, and we'll send them to the panelists, and we'll try to publish them in some way. So they will live on, so really the more the merrier. Last note for the panelists, just to keep things on time, we have Boone over here, who has a comically large flag that he is going to lift once we are basically out of time. And so, yeah, we'll keep it to 15 minutes. All right, thanks everyone. Further ado, we'll start with Dan.
All right, so hello, my name is Dan Taeyoung. I'm going to try to do a live demo, talk a little bit about essentially two metaphors about AI, hiking and cooking. It's actually not two because I kind of ran out of time.
Bend it towards you. Yeah.
It's actually not two metaphors, it's one metaphor. Let's see if this works. There we go. So yeah. So the thing I wanted to do is to talk a little bit about a way of thinking about AI and its affordances through metaphors and models. And this is a little bit modeled after the kind of task of this book, Metaphors We Live By Lecoff and Johnson, who I won't get into here. But I do think that kind of the models we have to think about technology and AI are pretty crucial. You know, at one point, the cars we had were called horseless carriages. Or to introduce the computer, Steve Jobs had to call it a bicycle for thinking. And and then I'm running into an error here. Let's see if this is the next one. No. Knew this happened. My cards are literally all shuffled, which is kind of what I'll get into. So there's a lot of different modalities that happening. Oh, here we go. Between text and image and video and et cetera and so forth. And there's a lot of different models on how we think about, AIs. Is it a blurry JPEG of the web? Is it this or that? This is really good essay by Amelia Wattenberger calling it an interface between hard and soft things. And then a lot of people try to articulate what are the metaphors we think about AI. Are we using human metaphors, non-human metaphors? Are we critical or not critical? When we talk to it, oftentimes we have an interface with a chatbot. So I want to kind of think a little bit about how to think about AI. And as my cards are all shuffled, I'm not sure where I am. Hello? Can you hear me now? That's much better. Okay, I'm going to try to speak louder. So essentially, what I'm going to try to do is a little bit talk about a single metaphor Largely because, yeah, I think the stakes of what we're doing with AI currently is it's kind of this like media inundation process where, you know, it's like saturating how we think and what we do with a variety of different medias. Yes, new workflows are being created, which forms of hypercharged collage, prompt engineering. Let's see. But the question I want to ask is, like, is AI-driven design really just image making, some sort of glorified form? So here's an example on Twitter, which is where all the kind of most live examples are, by the way, but someone kind of using generative AI to a series of queries to do some sort of interior design. Is that really going to be the end-all and be-all of AI-driven design, or is AI and optimization really the goal? Where it's really interesting, but kind of I want to try to have a conversation about what the affordances of this new thing is. How do we not just talk about it as a chatbot or an agent, but what's some model of a metaphor? So the thing I wanted to think about a little bit was to have a metaphor of a landscape. So let's say that design or any other practice is akin to hiking in a particular point in the landscape. In this landscape metaphor, distances between points are analogous to distance between disciplines and practices. A variety of transportation methods, so airplanes, trains, buses, cars, bicycles, hold trade-offs between accessibility, ease, and speed. So to go to a certain location, you might take a flight to an airport, a discipline, then to a train station, a subfield. You might take a taxi, go to a niche, and then hike with your own legs into a project. So I'm kind of setting up this metaphor of the landscape as the more you hike, the more you kind of carve into your own niche and find a specific project. In this metaphor, it's okay to dwell at airports or city centers, but in this metaphor, oftentimes interesting and meaningful projects requires a bit of exploration, which is why, and this exploration might entail hiking, which is a low-speed, high-agency navigation practice that can get you to high elevation or niche locations that a car cannot. So in other words, you go to an airport, you go to a bus station, and essentially you go to a hike so that the specific niches might be found of where specific you want to hike to or what specific design project you want to do. So yeah, this is a hiking, which is a low-speed, high-agency navigation practice, as opposed to a plane, which is a high-speed, low-agency practice, etc. So the more you fly, the more you might travel far and fast. The more you hike, the more you might find interesting niches. So I'm kind of using distance as a metaphor for kind of project complexity and how much you can kind of navigate from discipline to discipline. In this landscape metaphor, AI is a technology, a teleporter that can teleport you to every bus station on Earth. Let's kind of examine that, imagine that as a technology. A teleportation device has just created, that can teleport you to every bus station on Earth. So in the way that time travel reshaped the landscape of time and space, things like RAGs, retrieval augmented generation, or chatting with your database, reshapes the landscape of information retrieval. So you can kind of, instead of kind of having a long pathway for finding some detail, finding a layer of information is all at the same level through a single query. So the landscape shrinks and distorts irregularly, leaving some areas hyper-accessible, others relatively more remote. So the landscape might bunch up, creating both pockets of congregation and unexpected distance. So to translate the metaphor, certain portions of creative practice will become much easier. It'll be much easier to create a certain kind of website. It'll be much easier to create a certain kind of video, a certain kind of image, while other practices might become relatively difficult, the way that in this map of New York City, you have these micro pockets of difficult to navigate places. So with teleportation, the landscape becomes dotted with starting points, and kind of using AI as a metaphor, or sorry, the landscape of AI, using AI, the landscape gets dotted with starting points. So yeah, so what happens when everything but the last mile is nearly free? there's a few different things that I'm kind of speculating and thinking about through this metaphor. What can we glean through this metaphor? So one is coordination. So one-person CEOs, there's already this thing happening where AI agents are being created. Idea of creating your own AI employee. Yesterday, Salesforce, one of the biggest companies, crafted this idea of a limitless digital workforce. So this idea of agents that you communicate with and do work for you is already kind of going to be present. AI-supported management. These ideas of AI as a layer between people and CEOs, so like kind of people are experimenting with cutting out layers of middle management. Or using AIs as like intermediaries to do the kind of project management or communication between people. So in this metaphor, city centers move closer together as teleportation becomes more and more possible, aka the certain kinds of projects are more immediately achievable. So normative aesthetics might predominate. So either you can tell it looks like AI, or either looking like AI becomes more stylistically acceptable. Good enough workflows might enable rapid creativity by fewer people. For example, the one-person film studio. This just launched a few days ago, so you might have similar the way that digital audio workstations enabled one person producing musicians. You might have one-person film studios. So what happens to the last mile? So what do you do in your last mile? So what might some strategies, if you're a designer, the last little bit, you kind of teleport to the bus station, you can create some normative images. Maybe there's some differentiation you might do through your own niche knowledge, your own social cultural capital, your particular style. In other words, distance on the landscape or ability, it might matter less than nicheness of hiking methods. It might be more important that you have a very particular way of working through a project in a very particular moment in time than your ability to achieve kind of certain kinds of things. So in this kind of landscape metaphor, rather than hiking, if you have a particular way of ice climbing, you might be able to arrive at a certain point. Similarly enough, perhaps using generative AI for most tools, but you have a particular kind of editing approach that carves out your own niche in this landscape. One speculation I have is that, by definition, LLMs excel at norms. So maybe societally we might have this like bimodal fetishization of the human versus AI, scribble versus polish, and a resurgence of kind of a celebration of the irregular. This is out of order. I think one side effect of this kind of AI-based teleportation, the kind of consolidation of bus stops, is kind of easily generatable or creatable media forms, might be that a highly connected landscape might appear to be the only landscape because it's so achievable, certain kind of leaps in design are so possible with AI that only what's possible, easily possible with an AI might be understood as kind of primary landscape in which you can move around in. And one note diagram here is that this is kind of do I have time to explain this? What I want, what I don't want, polish and scribble. And so normally pre-AI, you might start at this rough, scribbly, rough place of what you don't want and eventually find your way to what you want and what's polished. With generative AI and tools, you start out at a given position of polish already, and then you kind of have to make your way sideways. I kind of wanted to posit this here. The side Twombly's of practices that might exist in the more scribbly, more rough, more less hewn parts of practice or design that might not be as easily achievable with generative AI. Okay, and that's why I wanted to present it in this fashion. I wanted to kind of work with physical pieces of paper, drop my cards, kind of work with purely scribbles around. So yeah, hopefully the metaphor is clear. Again, AI or design is a particular landscape. AI within that landscape as a series of teleporters that you can teleport to. The question then becomes, what is last mile? And not only is it the last mile, how will you hike? What are the particular ways in which we will each craft certain design practices, certain ways of being in the world that might enable us to carve out our particular niches, given that most places, the normative places, are easily traversable. If anything, I think that's kind of it. The hope is that I have just like seeded this landscape metaphor a little bit and the idea of hiking a little bit. I think the big question is going to be, in addition to how will we hike, what are the practices we might have that don't atrophy our hiking muscles, that we get used to doing certain things slowly or particularly or roughly or scribbly, or are less optimized in a certain way. So yeah, I think that is it. Thank you.
It's a really great metaphors to kick off, segue into my talk, which is also about landscape and also about teleporting to some stations, and I'll leave it there. So today, I'm really delighted to introduce Gemini capabilities in Google Earth. Thank you for having me present in this wonderful audience at the intersection of technology, spatial planning, urban design, computational design, the list goes on, and AI. So today's agenda is as follows. Firstly, I will give a brief introduction of the problem space we are tackling. Then I will introduce Gemini capabilities in Google Earth, really fresh off the press. The timing would not have been better because we announced it yesterday. Then I will present the use cases and some demos. So at Google, we have a unique opportunity to help lead the transition to a more sustainable future by making information more accessible and by driving innovation forward. Grounded in our mission, we are empowering individuals, organizations, governments with information through our products and platforms that billions of people engage with every day, including a lot of you, I assume. And this is to help make decisions that will drive, hopefully, positive actions for our planet. And one of the best examples of how we're making information more accessible is through Google Earth. So 19 years ago, we set out to chase a big, audacious goal of mapping the planet and cities in 3D. So today, in Google Earth, you can access incredibly comprehensive list of street view, 3D topography, geographic data, satellite imagery, the list goes on. And you bring those wealth of data into your canvas to explore and understand our ever-changing planet. So here is where my team comes in, and we're tasked with applying AI to this rich model of the world and gaining insights that can help cities, urban planners, developers, clean energy developers, spatial designers, planners, and all these other professionals make more sustainable decisions. So to put this work into context, 40% of the total global energy-related CO2 emissions are contributed by buildings and constructions. And specifically, 11% are attributed to new constructions embodied emissions, and 28% to existing buildings' operational emissions. All in all, the lack of proper spatial planning has an enormous impact on sustainability and our future on this planet. So that's why my team and I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can provide sustainability professionals with information about the built environment, like solar, that helps the sustainable choice, the easy one. So this is where Gemini capabilities in Google Earth come in. And we know that getting accurate information, getting really precise understanding of the world, and saving time in doing so, we've all done like tedious tasks of like gathering data and like putting all into like a neat format so we can make decisions. are so important to sustainability professionals. That's why we announced Gemini capabilities on Google Earth yesterday, and I'm really excited to talk about how we're helping planners, spatial designers to get detailed insights about the world with the pilot of this launch. And so this new early pilot will be available to trusted testers this month, where we'll gather feedback before launching it more broadly next year. So please stay tuned at the end of the talk where I can share the QR code so you can try it yourself and be one of the trust testers. And now I want to make some highlights of the capabilities in Google Earth that are made possible by Gemini. So you can use Gemini to create unique data layers and conduct GIS operations, derive geospatial insights with AI-powered workflow enhancements. And you can converse in your own words with Gemini to identify potential sites for new amenities, visualize boundaries, and display points of interest, and more. And lastly, you can also reduce the time spent finding, preparing, and analyzing geospatial data from days, and some of us doing really advanced degree work, weeks or months to minutes on a no-code platform. So with that, I'll jump right into the demo. So this is a case of mapping electric vehicle charging stations in Richmond, Virginia. Going back to Dan's talk of teleporting to bus stations, we'll teleport to EV charging stations in Richmond, Virginia. So with this feature, urban planners can simply ask questions like, can you map the 5 Richmond zip codes with the fewest EV chargers relative to their geographic size? Display the zip codes along with their chargers so you can converse with the features. Then the feature will map and visualize and find what you're looking for in a second. So after that, you can also follow up with like different queries. Okay, so now I see all these electric vehicle charging stations. Can you map shopping centers and hotels with no EV chargers? So this will trickle down into more actions and insights so you can decide and make sustainable decisions really easy. So we hope with this feature, planners, spatial designers can reduce the time spent finding, preparing, and analyzing data from days to just minutes without GIS training or code. So this enables all of us to the power of insights and geospatial sort of like data analysis that only like limited like users were able to get. And now these capabilities can simplify complex workflows and tasks, mostly somewhat like tedious tasks that would actually block a lot of the complex thinking and help users actually do what matters. So please express your interest here. And this is a QR code you can scan to learn more about Gemini capabilities in Google Earth and sign up for a trusted testing program here. Thank you.
So thanks for being here, because I think we're in a very kind of pivotal moment in technology history. And with time always not on our side these days, it's good to take a step back. So we are Spatial Pixel. Hi. We like to say we're making spatial computing for your space and not for your face. These are our faces. This is what we look like. So I, at Spatial Pixel, focus a lot on our spatial interactions, the actual spatial experiences. And I also teach a class here right in the CDP program called spatial UX on this topic?
I actually look like this as opposed to what's in the brochure. So I'm the AI. I'm sorry. No, wait. I teach a course called Spatial AI here at GSAPP, where we explore different conceptions of space and the semantics of space, and try to explore, use that to explore spatial reasoning for designing, operating, and traversing space. And so hopefully students here will take a look and take it next semester.
So before we started Spatial Pixel, my background was actually in many different domains. I started the generative design product at Sidewalk Labs that later became part of Google Earth. And then today I'm spending more time teaching both spatial computing and physical computing at these different universities.
I was, before Spatial Pixel, I was director of artificial intelligence at a company called Consensus, which is a Web3 and blockchain company. And my career's been sort of more serendipitous. It started in architecture, but then I was an academic for about 4 years at NYIT and Yale School of Architecture. I was a software engineer at a data science startup. I was head of product at a VR real estate marketing startup. I've been through cloud computing, where I worked with Fortune 2000 companies on their tech strategies. Now I'm here at Spatial Pixel, sort of feel like getting back to my roots, so to speak, with AI and space together. And so our, oh, I think this is yours.
Oh, great. Is there audio?
Yeah, but you're gonna.
Oh, I see. All right. So our practice at Spatial Pixel really started here in this video I'll show in a moment. Really just playing around with some of these new tools that are emerging and just seeing what they could do, and especially trying to understand how they interact with physical spaces.
A blue circle moves between the left of the canvas and the left of the chair. A yellow circle and a green square fall on the chair. Purple circles emerge, growing bigger from the center of the chair.
So it's kind of amazing here. We're just developing an interaction here that uses things like object detection
to the left of the chair
and generating code on the fly related to what it's seeing. And this was just our early experiments. There's not
on the left side of the campus
that much that I'm packing that we've really built here yet. But it's pretty phenomenal that already you can take things like prepositions to understand spatial relationships.
Random letters appear to the right of the chair.
Great, we can pause it there. And I have to apologize because we have tons of videos, so we're gonna have to do this over and over again. A really important point here is that before this even started, programmable space already existed. So Cedric Price, an architect, all the way back in the 60s, was already investigating this idea that a building itself could be programmable. He was actually working with people in computing to think about physical buildings not just as spaces that we occupy, but things that could actually be programmed. And by programmed, we mean like could be responsive. And what's interesting about this is when we think about physical spaces as programmable, this also affords a certain kind of accessibility, an ability to like go to a space and actually change how it behaves. And what's really interesting is that way back when, architects were thinking about physical spaces as programmable, and now with the emergence of spatial computing, we're starting to see that same idea emerge from companies like Apple or the Meta Ray-Bans. But strangely enough, when they think about spatial computing, the technology isn't the space, it's actually on your face. Their version of spatial computing is to put their device onto you. So I think it's a really important moment for us to think about what role do designers and architects have in thinking, again, about technology being in the space and how we make spaces themselves programmable instead of the technology.
And so the next experiment after the one with the chair was this. We're very familiar today that information systems that we have through mobile phones are very isolating and isolated. And so this was an experiment to try to create or experiment with an information system that meets us where we are. So let's say you're at the end of a long day, you need a cocktail, and I don't advocate using alcohol as like a stress relief, but let's say just in that moment you needed one and like someone recommended one, you just got off a Zoom call and someone recommended a cocktail to you. You have to search, you have to authenticate in your phone, then search through the search results manually, read someone's life story, and then finally get to the ingredients. And by that time, you really need that drink. And then if your hands are covered in like sweet vermouth, like you're like interacting with that phone is even more difficult. So our practice, we try to really orient around understanding the mindset that someone is in. And so with this, like, could we engage a system or create a system that uses projection, but also more like a passive attention system rather than an active attention system that draws you away, something that keeps you present in the moment, that keeps you with your guests. Right?
Yeah, so, you know, in contrast to something like VR that's emerging, we're really inspired by things like the dumb phone movement that's much lower stimulation than a phone or than something like VR.
Right. And so, so what if we could expand on that idea to the scale of a neighborhood or a city? So we imagine a multimodal system that goes beyond just the kitchen to achieve similar ends, particularly to reveal what we call locale-based knowledge. We like using locale instead of local, just a nod to the previous topic, because local AI in the engineering sense is a little bit different. But we imagine a system that combines location data, real-time locale-based information, language models, and vision and sound. And the vision is really important because the context in a locality sometimes refers to information that is not available in a centralized database and likely never will be. So for example, like in Philadelphia, only like parking garages and major parking lots are documented by the Philadelphia Parking Authority. But the street parking is actually documented with the signs that are there on the sidewalk. And so we imagine both a kind of system that offers visual interpretation and potentially a kind of crowdsourced collection and correction system. So if we could play this video, please.
What was important to Philadelphia about Quakers?
Quakers were integral to Philadelphia's founding, emphasizing religious tolerance and participatory government.
Does the 5 go to Liberty Lands Park?
The SEPTA Route 5 bus does not go directly to Liberty Lands Park.
Where does Route 48 go?
The SEPT Route 48 bus travels from the area of 27th and Allegheny to the Frankfurt Transportation Center.
Can I park here right now?
Yes, you can park there, as the sign indicates the restrictions apply Monday to Saturday, and it's currently Sunday.
You never know.
What's the
right?
most popular place on this list?
The most popular place listed is likely the Independence Park sites, which includes historic attractions like Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell.
So you see us in all
What
these-
is currently playing at the Arden Theater?
You see me rigged up.
The Arden Theater Company is currently showcasing Lady Sitting, which has been extended and runs through March 3rd.
Yeah, it's really hard to come across in videos, but like these are interactive systems that she's really engaging with, as opposed to a mock-up.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because now in our neighborhood, people see us walking around doing strange things with like, because some of these systems don't exist yet. So to build them and record them, we actually have to like bring our computer on us, or we have to like have a high quality microphone. They're like, oh no, what are they doing now?
That's right. And so, we'll skip. So we're gonna skip this one. And so the original prompt, how will AI affect the relationship between designers and tools? Well, we do make open source tools for different purposes. We have 3 in particular, and we'll show you the major one here, which is our programmable space platform that we call Procession. So if you could play this video, please. So it's named as a nod to processing, but also a kind of procession of ideas. It stems from the idea the fact that spatial computing is really hard. And so considering that idea of programmable space, and while Cedric Price was limited by budget, just as much as he was tech available, Procession is intended to enable spatial designers to program with multimodal AI using natural language. So we separate programmability from code in particular, and we're trying to empower designers like you to help with a tool that interprets intent and desired outcomes. And so here you see me like going through a process of creating a kind of traffic analysis here, sort of. But the innovation here isn't counting cars. The innovation is the fact that we can write these programs with natural language. And so one goal would be to facilitate more and more analyses, such as the ones you've seen throughout today, but in a more rapid and real-time fashion. So you can actually do it yourself, so to speak. And so we're using it to combine different modes of AI, vision, body tracking, pose detection, like whatever you could imagine in one place. All right, this is a similar idea of continuing through this idea of programmable space. But here, instead of programming an analysis to help us understand what might be an activity in space in the language that we want, this is more about using Procession to, you can cut the audio on this one, by the way, to create a desired behavior in this space. So here is Procession interacting with an RFID reader, and I'm making it aware of that RFID reader. And also, I want to use terminology like the person sitting down and turning on and off a lamp instead of the semantics of Arduino or the programming language involved or like that. So, so similarly to what we explored in the Spatial AI course, can we create a kind of semantic model with a large language model layered on top of programmable logic? And that's me getting the logic wrong. That's on purpose.
And quality acting.
That's right. Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, great. So I just want to leave you with this last video. If you can advance to the next slide.
And audio for this one, please.
Audio for this would be great.
The tech industry has spent decades trying to get us to strap computers to our faces. But what are we doing?
Can you track the index fingers of my hands?
Shannon, could you turn it up a bit?
At Spatial Pixel, we're building a new kind of spatial computer. One for your space, not for your face.
Great, but can you make these white and draw a line between the 2 points on my index fingers?
It's a spatial computer meant for creativity that anyone can use. And it starts with our bodies, not buttons.
Great. Can you now make a noise like an oscillator based on the length of the line?
It's controllable with plain language, and it's one that keeps up with our wild ideas. For creative coders, artists, and designers, it helps us explore concepts without worrying about the code. It can respond to everyday things. Use our voice.
Hello.
Interact with drawings. And most importantly, interact with each other, not a screen. But just how many ways that we interact with the world could it really use?
What is it? When both of my index fingers are on a key, drop the octave.
We hope by moving computing out of the box and into our environments, that we can see less of a virtual world and be more present with those around us in the real one.
All right. You can bring it to the last slide. So what you just saw is our open research platform that we're developing for spatial computing. We really think that the future of technology, the future of spatial computing, doesn't have to be in a computer or on your face. That actually architects started a long time ago with this idea of programmable spaces. So there's an opportunity to work together to bring technology back into space and back into the physical environment. So thank you.
Hello,
Also-
everyone. Really nice to be in this group and following these folks. My name is Richard Tae. I'm a professor at Parsons, and I also run a small design studio called TheGreenEyl. And I think in Dan's metaphor, I would be a rock climber or a trail runner. So for me as a visual designer, the obvious thing to think about is generative AI and specifically image generators. And using just one prompt, they promise fast, effortless generation of any image you want. And I actually find that question really interesting. If you can generate anything you want, what will it be that you generate? And I'll also be quoting Taeyoung and specifically this article, Why AI Isn't Going to Make Art. And he criticizes this one prompt idea, and he says, if you do that, the AI has to fill in all the choices that you are not making. So, and it does that with at least two methods. One of them is using the average, which is equivalent to the least interesting choice possible, or with style mimicry, emulating the choices that other people have already made before you. And you can see that on image galleries of AI images out there. So if we can generate anything we want, are these the things we're generating? And you can also see that it's highly derivative, and Simon Willison called this money laundering for copyrighted data. And for a recent commission for the Alliance Graphique Internationale poster competition, I chose to fully embrace this aesthetic, and I selected a few common tropes of this aesthetic with its perfect rendering and unusual aesthetic, and at the same time very bland aesthetic, and called it what this is called now, dream slop. But I also wanted to take a step back, and I think some previous speakers earlier today did this as well, which is kind of just to think about AI, LLM, and GPT are the buzzwords that we're talking about, but AI is a huge landscape, and actually a lot of things that we think about as AI are using technologies that are not LLM-based. And I tried to find a diagram that really encompasses this, and Kate Crawford's example of anatomy of an AI system is maybe the most comprehensive, summarizing both the previous steps that go into an AI system and the hardware systems, and then also what happens after an AI system like Alexa is used. But maybe for my purposes, this summary will do, and I've actually worked with many of these different technologies within design projects as a designer. Sorry, I have to. So some of the projects I'll be looking at revolve around amplifying spatial gestures, interactive spatial explanations, accessing the infinite, the importance of choices, and new interfaces for a new aesthetic. So in this project, working for a human scale at Design Week Milan, we were really inspired by the Human Scale Manual, which is one of the first documents to identify ergonomics for furniture design. And specifically, I think now I have to press a button somewhere. No, I don't. The abstraction of the human body into 15 key points, kind of almost like a skeleton representation. And so we took this and we used computer vision to identify and capture the human body and create almost a light sculpture in the physical space. So here AI is actually not replacing human labor or human gestures, but it is amplifying it and expanding it into a text space. This is another project that really only revolved around AI. This is at the Design Museum in Tokyo, 2121 design site, and we worked with Google Translate. And it was about a new way of translating using one-shot translations, which means having many, many languages in one parametric data space and being able to translate from one language into many, many languages. And this project also was about the amplification of the human voice in this case. So visitors could walk up to this microphone, they were asked a question, and they would answer it with their voice, and they would see a visualization of the machine learning model behind the scenes, and then would see the translation across 24 languages and would also hear it in spoken word. So we used a plethora of AI technologies, voice to text, text to speech, synthetic voices, and of course Google Translate itself.
大切なものを大事にする。
This work was at the Tokyo Olympics and was also a celebration of language, obviously, and the different writing systems and their typographic systems as well. Accessing the infinite. In my teaching and also with individual projects, I've worked a lot with digital archives, more specifically digital museum archives. And very often the obvious thing that museums do is digitize their collection and then put them up on websites. This is the Met. and you have kind of this filterable grid of images. And really a large proportion of the collection is never seen. I think 4% of the collection are on the floor at the Met. And so at the Williams College Museum of Art, we used their collection and we created a space. And the first gesture was really just to put out all of the images at once. And we created this wallpaper like grid print showing all of the images. And we used TSNE to structure and organize the images. So we did not use traditional taxonomies like chronology or author and so on, but we only used the visual similarity between images. So creating new associations between the images independent of their traditional taxonomies. And then there was an augmented reality layer to this, where you could scan each of the images and then find out more about them. Here's a quick, fast video of a one-dimensional journey through this data space. We used a similar approach at the MIT Museum, which we recently relaunched and reopened in a new space. And here, similarly, the question was, how do you bring a presence to this collection that exists virtually into the physical space and have this big atrium in the middle of the museum also with a huge screen? And so we looked through the collection and also used TSNE to identify this kind of associative data space around the images. Again, ignoring traditional chronologies, taxonomies such as chronology and author, and finding a path through these. And so at the MIT Museum, a lot of the other exhibitions are very didactic and full of content. And so this is more of a meditative calm space at the center of it. And it's a real-time application that is never the same, running 24/7. And as you can see, the images have visual similarities. We're in black and white photography or in illustration, but this is literally a transdisciplinary collage across all of the disciplines at MIT, from art to research documents and scientific documents. Generativity and participation. Taeyoung notes, speaking of choices, art is something that results from making a lot of choices. And I want to talk about this painter who just had a show here in New York, David Saul. And he did this quite complex process where he actually created a model based on his own paintings, then generated images with it, printed those on canvas, and then painted on top of it. I saw him speak about it. It was really fascinating to also see how he arrived at that. And it's also not a derivative data set, or at least it is his own data that he's using here. And I tried to map this out just a little bit in the sense of how many choices did he make in this process. And there are years and years of painting, so hundreds and thousands and millions of choices were made. He created the model, then generated images, selected images out of those in order to print them, which were again many, many choices, and then painted over it again, again having a lot of choices. And so a while back, I worked on a visual identity for the MIT Media Lab. And here, the whole idea was to have a generative design, a logo that is both visually coherent, but at the same time looks different all the time. And at the time, the exciting thing were the permutations, also the thing I was really excited about. But now in retrospect, I think the more interesting thing are the choices. So the actual visual system that you see could generate over millions of logos. But we kind of had to encode aesthetic properties into the software. So for example, we wanted the shapes to overlap in a certain way and not in another. We wanted it to hit the full space that's available for the logo. And so aesthetically, suddenly we culled it down from millions to 40,000. And then there was a second participatory process because students were allowed to pick their own logo out of this batch. And so in that moment, we currently have a participatory and a community-based design editing happening. Drawing with data. Recently, I have gotten back into drawing and hand drawing and also hand lettering. I've been doing a bunch of lettering, and I'm working on one project that is about quotes about the future of AI. And so here, this combines hand lettering with then generative AI processes, if this plays. And so we're combining the generative capabilities of Gen AI with the very human gestures of the hand drawing. And here's another example.
If we choose to lose control, we'll lose control.
And this is based on a telling quote by Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft.
If we choose to lose control, we'll lose control.
And based on this research, we developed another project, which is literally a drawing tool. And in this case, you can draw in different colors with different brushes. And at the same time, you're also always constantly in the prompt. And you can also change the seeds and so on. So this is hand lettering with the AI tool. And suddenly, many, many more choices become possible. And this being in real time also really changes the situation because it becomes very much a back and forth and iterative process between the hand drawing person and the Gen AI as it goes. I wonder what it's spelling. Here's our GSAPP. And I'll end with one more quote from Taeyoung. He only speaks about writing, so I had to alter it a little bit. I think any piece of design that deserves your attention as a person is the result of effort expended by the person who created it. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for presenting. It's really great to see all your work in this context. And also, I really appreciate Dan for offering the metaphor at the start of kind of like hiking versus teleporting. Because in some ways, I feel like we all have different alignments with that in some ways, and we can describe certain aspects of certain things you've talked about as different degrees of hiking and teleporting. And I was just going to start, well, there's two main questions I kind of want to ask. Or Shannon, we have, if you can share the screen that How is extending, it should have the holding slide and also, you got it? All right, cool. There's two, oh, there we go. Perfect. So here's some questions up here already. And once again, everyone, please feel free to continue to submit questions. We have some good ones in so far. Someone said you're really cool, Dan. And there's, yeah, the good ones. But, so there are kind of two main questions that I wanted to ask. One of them is a little bit about what kind of future modes of practice do these kind of tools enable. The other one is what might we be missing, right? This the kind of hiking and teleporting. And the first, just as an open question for everyone. So there's obviously a long history of technology and its relationship with architecture. And one of the questions also brought up the MIT Architecture Machine Group as a great example of this that I know that everyone here is familiar with. And just from your perspective, how do you see each of the things that you are working on in the context of that long history? Is it a kind of, general trend in the same direction? Is it an abrupt jump? And what are the kind of future modes of practice that are enabled by that? I know you guys have an answer. So.
Yeah, no, I'm just processing.
Yeah.
Well, I think I was, in relation to your question, but also to the way Dan framed the opening, I think it's really important for us to think about, as a designer, especially now, where there's so much teleportation you can do. There's always been modes of teleportation, like being able to jump over certain processes. But it feels like right now, what's really important is to think about what you want to jump over. Like where are we getting stuck in canyons that we never wanted to go into? And I think after spending more time getting familiar with technology, and I feel like for a long time having a lot of envy over people that were very technical, as I got more technical, realized, oh wait, no, these are terrible canyons we don't want to be in. And so I think it's being intentional about like where you want to hike. What are and I think this is a moment to tie it back to like the history. I think this is a moment where designers and architects have more opportunity to say what they want to skip over and be intentional about where they want to hike. So I hope that people don't think that technology is always going to automate the things that we should be focused on. There's a moment here where we can be cognizant and say, it makes sense for us to automate things that maybe are distracting us from actually focusing our attention on things that like really importantly need our attention. Like especially around things like our presence or like physical space. You could be a software engineer working on something very important, but then you find day in and day out you're spending 8 hours or 10 hours a day like looking at a screen and never talking to the person next to you. So, yeah.
I think the architecture machine group is an interesting reference. I feel like the project Seek, which had gerbils, right, kind of moving around in this system while there's this robotic arm that was moving around the blocks. I don't know, I feel like that legacy is pretty strong, and there's an antagonistic relationship between the computer, which is this kind of other entity, and then the life cycle of these gerbils, and then how do you deal in this conflict between the two? And I feel like that metaphor is really persistent, and I would like to kind of get away from it a little bit, because I think it's really compelling to think of AI as this other, as this kind of like answering, intelligence that might tell us something interesting. I was thinking that the way we treat AI is very much like an extraterrestrial, like what other interesting knowledge might they have? And so I feel like that kind of antagonism between machine and human would be nice to move away from. Robin Sloan has this really good essay called Thinking with the Machine, where he has this kind of like, this was like a few years ago where he talks about using autocomplete to collaborate with the autocomplete trained on like Russian science fiction. So you'd write a little bit and press tab and then complete based on a certain text, and then you say like, that's interesting, but not quite. Kind of reminds me of Richard, the kind of painter you talked about, who would paint on top of his own work. So I feel like it's nice to write. And the second metaphor I was going to give but didn't share was cooking, because I think cooking is one of those things that resists optimization. Like it's nice to cook. Like I don't want to put my veggies into like a chopper. I want to chop them myself. I love that feeling. I like the feeling of getting better. And so I think there are certain things with technology that I would like to continue to do. Hopefully certain hikes that are more difficult, and programming languages or ways of thinking that are actually quite difficult and interesting in a particular way, And so I feel like that kind of way of thinking about like how is a human changing as a result of chopping the veggies, or how it may change and changing as a result of using this weird autocomplete, is really nice to think, not as a kind of antagonism between another entity, but as a way that kind of invites like a certain kind of skill or a certain kind of practice into the person who's working with it. So yeah, I feel like in that way, hiking is a good metaphor, because it is something that if you're in the middle of it, you're like, why did I do this again at some points? But then you're like, oh, okay, this is, so there's, so I feel like, yeah, regarding the architecture machine group, yeah, it feels like that legacy, or at least, I love Nicholas Negroponte's or that time, but that kind of antagonism feels like it like persists and has a kind of long history that would be nice to move away from.
Yeah, I think a key thing that's happening right now is, especially when writing code, LLMs help us really democratizes programming, and I think that is just unique. And so some of the most amazing things we can do is not actually working with AI specifically, but having access to computation. So a lot of the works that I showed, a lot of the work that was shown today was not AI-based per se, but just using the power of computation as in the process, in the design process. And if that becomes easier and gives us more access and maybe allows us to jump to certain locations that were much harder to jump to before, I think it's really powerful. But this also still speaks from a very privileged position, right? If you're in that position to be able to work with computation in this abstracted sense, you're already in a very good position to start with.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was going to kind of say something similar. I wonder, you know, Violet, to what you offered is we're now in a position where we can sort of figure out what we like to jump more. I wonder if there's like some kind of roadmap or cookbook, like how do we think about what things are worth jumping, what things are worth preserving, right? Because there's certainly like a part of the iterative design process that we don't want to lose. And, you know, some generative technologies kind of just give us an output, right? And it's like, how do we think about kind of that balance? Any of you have any thoughts?
I mean, in the tech world, we sometimes make a distinction between output and outcome, and sometimes impact. We say like there's oftentimes a real obsession with the output, meaning a document that you're writing, a logo that you're drawing, and whatnot. And we struggle, like the different roles in a tech company might struggle between the desire to create a logo faster versus a logo that actually truly represents brand and identity and things like that. And really the outcome you want is solid brand identity. And I think architecture is, I'm really fascinated with spatial design because it's always mediated, right? You can't like go out and like make a space with your hands like you can a sculpture. And so there's always this sort of double or triple mediation process we go through. And I think oftentimes when we're building a representation of, when we're making a representation of something, we can often sort of focus on the output, right? Without getting enough opportunity based on the tools we have or the media that we're working with to come back and evaluate the desired outcome. And I think my hope is that AI now is one of these things that is one of these media that we can not only use, but also develop ourselves to spend more time in that outcome universe than in the output universe. It's almost like the term user experience focused way too much on user and not enough on experience. And so like really, what we should be thinking about is the mindset of the people who will inhabit our spaces, like being able to maybe even predict or simulate or at least test what might happen should we make a change in the built environment in some way. And I'm hoping that at least the language-based AI that we have now, and perhaps a way of, you know, combining all of that into one sort of medium, will allow us to do that. Will allow us to sort of fulfill what we want to really do and express our intent and our desired outcomes instead of necessarily always having to drop into this sort of mechanics of the output we're trying to make.
Did you have a thought too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last experiment that I showed tried to really speak to that, because in a way, the hard part would be what the AI does, would have been, which is go into Photoshop and then mock it all up in exactly that way. And the part that I specifically in this context enjoy is the drawing part, right? And to me also the most human, if I may say, gesture there is. I don't even know on which axes these two things exist, and I might use them in this project in this way and have 80% drawing and 20% generation, and in the next project it might be different. But to be able to focus on that and potentially taking the flying and teleporting for granted and only focusing on hiking sounds good to me.
Totally.
But it might not be the case for everybody and for every
Yeah.
project and every context.
Yeah. On that note, Gia, I wanted to ask you about Gemini for Google Earth that you talked about today. So I've done a lot of work with geospatial data. I teach a class about it. I know how much of a pain it is and how much time it takes to get data right and to put it down. At the same time, I also know that there are like so many times in which I've learned so much more about what I'm trying to map through just like that really finicky piking process of like finding the data, finding why it doesn't fit, and like finding a little bit learning about the source of the data set through like having to interrogate it with it directly. I just wonder, like, I know you can't talk about product stuff directly, but just wonder, like, what are the thoughts like behind that balance from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to speak for my personal opinions
Right,
here.
right.
And I think it's so valuable that we go through these learning processes ourselves. So for example, even if like these like big models are available, you know, when you take first, like, I don't know, intro to machine learning course, you do it like from scratch and you understand like how these like discretized, sometimes differential, you know, computations like come together to do this like complex, in a way, like not just computations, but like it leads to some results and create a model, and it abstracts and it, sometimes tries to like capture the high dimensional spaces that we can't fully comprehend. And I think there's that like beauty of computation in that process of actually doing and learning. Yeah, so that's, I think, definitely absolutely valuable. But I'm also just like really inspired by some of the use cases of AI in the world. I've been personally very touched by the Nobel Prizes this year, the application of this technology in finding some of the really hard problems in sciences and society. Predicting proteins has just been like 50-year-long challenge. And I think, you know, like there are many ways we can apply this technology for good and for the ways that we can really accelerate learning and understanding of the world can be enriched by some of these technologies and computations when we approach with the right values.
Yeah, totally.
I think one thing that sticks out to me and like being intentional about where you want to go deep and where, what should we offload to AI? I'm like reflecting on teaching physical computing over the years, and one of my biggest frustrations when I was first teaching it is that I spent so much time with students thinking about things like how do I solder this piece to this other thing? Where can I find this kind of sensor and who produces that? And by the end of the semester, there was very little conversation about should this experience be motion-based? Should it actually be more about speech and sound? Is the interaction best for 10 people or is it best for an individual? And I think there's a danger with, I think there's a lot of value to be had in learning computation and taking that long hike. So I don't think that we should become like, I don't think we should like skirt over all of it. But I think there's a danger, especially in a design program, to feel a desire to go too heavily on the technical side. That I think what is really exciting about CDP is that I think it allows us to kind of float, like be in both worlds and be very intentional about the kinds of questions we're asking. So we can spend time thinking, this actually should be a gesture interface. How would we have something that was gesture-based for 10 people and not get too sidetracked on like these side quests that maybe distract us from what really matters?
Yep. Yeah. It's a perfect segue to like kind of last really, really wide open question that I wanted to ask before we do a couple of audience ones, which is just like, we're in this computational design program and this larger school of architecture and design here. Like, do any of y'all have any thoughts about how our students should relate to these tools, think about these things that we're talking about?
Relate to the AI tools?
Yeah.
Yeah, one is learn how they work, like pop the hood and learn how they work. Right, so just similar, like, maybe like, don't take a machine learning course, but maybe like an online course, just so you see like how difficult it really is. Because like a lot of the vision models that we have are just awful. And there's a reason for that, right? Like it's really, really hard. And the other is like, I think that there are sort of like 3 levels of intervention. One is to take the tools off the shelf and just use them, which I think for the CDP students, like maybe that's not the best approach. Like just taking what Autodesk or Adobe or Figma give us, like that is an opinion that is not necessarily informed by what is the best outcome for a spatial designer to be implementing, right? Like those are sort of like, in some ways they're kind of tech novelties where they kind of stumbled across a way to generate an image and then like rush to commercialize it. And so it doesn't mean there isn't value in that, but I think we have to be a little bit suspicious about what we're being given. We're being given potentially economically viable features to a product that's part of a commercial enterprise. And we see all the time, Google in particular, sort of like having overtures into some market or space and then disbanding it. Then there's the low-level implementation, which is like, training models yourself and like engaging it from that perspective. And then I think there's this middle ground where, and I think Dan and I have talked about this before briefly, it's like you can use some of the more open platforms like Hugging Face or like the APIs that are available from different AI companies and like create and architect and orchestrate AIs like talking to each other. Like there's this sort of middle ground where you can know just enough about how to hook things together where you can actually come up with really, really interesting things and use that as a kind of way to build your own medium and explore how AI works. It's almost like building your own AI-powered tools. And I think that's where I would like encourage CDP students to land, and that also gives them an opportunity to spend a little bit of time building tools, but also a lot more time interfacing, say, with the other programs in the school, and how amazing is it that there are 8 programs that sort of can synergize off of each other and have different perspectives. I think it's amazing.
I think my comment would be, I've talked a lot about hiking, but I also think the teleportation is really interesting because if that actually exists, you could go somewhere, take a little bit of food from somewhere, go travel across the world, combine cuisines together. And actually speaking in terms of tools, if you can get to 80% of the way there really quickly, you can combine a lot of things that would be normally really hard to do so. And I think as students, I've been having fun doing this. You can actually combine a lot of different processes so that you're not relying on a model to make a result. You're kind of hooking up a variety of different technologies that either often aren't combined together or would be time consuming to do so because you do have to learn this whole new technology. But because you can get 80% of the way there, you can do a lot of things in conjunction and come up with unique combinations that maybe have been really hard to do so or could only have been possible in larger teams. And so if an individual moves at the speed of a team, or moves with the capacity of a team, but with the nimbleness of a person, I feel like we might find, my optimism towards the teleportation of the 80% is that we might also find really interesting, weird niches as like people make very, very strange, interesting, unique things that are particular to their own creative or design sensibility without coordinating with a group of people. Not that that's not great, but just because it's possible. So I would say for students to like try a lot of different things out, see what things can hook up to each other. I feel like both the hiking and the teleportation are really unique, and maybe I overemphasized the hiking, but
We love it.
Yeah, I think I like to convey sort of like my personal experience and advice from a former student to a current student of like architecture and design computation. I think what I've learned in this like beautiful disciplines was that it's so hard to be mindful and aware of the medium. Like right now we're breathing air, but I don't think about it. And I sometimes felt like that was the power and the sort of criticality of the media we experience. And I think it's not the exception for AI technologies. It's how do we interface that technology in the way that we're very mindful about its presence and its also the mediation it brings. I'm following a pretty generic trope here, but I really think it's important to think about like what kinds of like systems it's creating when we're designing, planning spatially, and like just approach the world and not just like take it for granted, but like really think about it. And I think that's why like things like examining your own answers of like what, you know, like just don't take like what LLM output give you for granted, but like what is it doing? Why is it doing? And I think that's why like some of the issues like data accuracy and like preventing hallucination will be like more and more important.
Sure. I'm teaching in the design and technology program at Parsons, and we have similar thoughts about it. And I think it's a yes and answer. I myself have always called myself kind of a design generalist, and I think the education really has to be both generalist and specialist. So when I worked in industry as a generalist, it really was about being able to think across many disciplines and putting them together and being able to communicate them, whether it's in a design mock-up or a small prototype or something like that. And then at the same time, it's so helpful to have one discipline within which you're really good. There's the graphic design studio called Experimental Jet Set, and they have the model of the band model. They say any group of people that work together should work like a band. Everybody has their role or the instrument to play. And I love that idea. And I think that makes up the best teams. And so you probably want to know what instrument you're playing, but you also really want to know about all the other instruments.
How are we on time? Should we probably, I think we're over time, aren't we? Okay. Yeah, maybe just some kind of real quick audience questions. I think there was like maybe two about the infrastructure of generative AI, and like be good to get your perspective on how we should think about that. So particularly one of them was directed towards Gia and Gemini, which is just like the carbon intensive, you know, part of generative AI systems, and you know, how should like planning and urban design firms that focus on sustainability think about this in relation to using the tool. That's one part. And the other part is, you know, I know there are a number of kind of open source systems now for large language models specifically, but there is a portion of the technology that is pushing us in different sort of like corporate multinational silos, right? Access to the tools, and how should we think about that in relation to open source technologies, et cetera?
Can I answer the last one?
Yep.
I think that it's a really interesting moment. I keep saying that it's just like technology is changing right now, and there's an opportunity, I think, for us to rethink things like spatial computing as not what the Apple Vision Pro is saying, but or that maybe AI isn't open AI, you know?
Yeah.
An AI strategy is not an open AI strategy. And so I think we're really interested in how, when we're competing with things that are so powerful as these like giant monopolies, really, some of these like grassroots initiatives or open source strategies become incredibly like even more important. And so I don't know, I guess my answer would be that we need to invest more in collective efforts because this is going to need to be some sort of shared resource. The power or like the effort behind something like training models does not make sense for each individual to be doing. It's almost like a giant electric plant or a reservoir. You know, don't put one in everyone's backyard. It doesn't make sense. And so we should be very intentional about like the governance of that, and perhaps more grassroots efforts or open source could be the way to go.
Else? Judy, you have a-
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting question also about the like hardware and infrastructural systems behind like the design technology is an interesting one. And yeah, it's even more invisible than some of the like codes and like software systems that we work with. And carbon intensity and climate change, climate problems are like very urgent for all of us. And I'm trying to be humble personally here because I started taking a sustainability course, and there are just like so many interconnected like entities and like systems at play when we think about like carbon footprints. And so what are the like benefits and what are the trade-offs? And I think those are really important questions to think about. Like if we can, you know, like just going back to the like protein prediction example, I think that's like such a wonderful and inspiring use case of like how we can really see beyond what, you know, like an individual can like comprehend and really try to solve hard problems that can tackle all sorts of like downstream use cases like medical cures or like finding biological like discoveries. I think there are a lot of things we can be hopeful about, but also be mindful about our usage and trying to transition into like net zero or even like net negative futures.
If no one else has any other thoughts to share, is that a thought forming?
It is a thought. With the last one, or kind of jumping off what you're saying, Violet, about it's a pessimistic thought, so I don't know if I should share it.
I love pessimism.
I think that one of the things we'll see with LLMs is, in like local LLMs and local models, is the kind of how, I think the question that I think will be how models will be trained on different intellectual property and different subspecialties different groups will have. In a slide I said like, oh, Columbia Law Review will sell their LLM access, or like certain groups will sell particular LLM access. So I think one of the questions to note is like the shape of like what the LLMs, as more and more custom or like fine-tuned LLMs emerge, how they will adapt or be following the existing kind of contours of intellectual or like almost political power, like certain power forms, you know, will be shaped according to what will shape and co-shape, you know, the structure of LLMs, and what kind of specialized LLMs will you subscribe to. This LLM is really helpful for this, that LLM is helpful for that, this LLM is trained in a very specific way. So I am kind of like, not concerned, but I do think that we are in a particular point where a lot of models are open source and a lot of models are for subscription, you know, but I wonder if that will continue and how the kind of contours of, future models will follow like subscription-based models or certain moats, as to, you know, which is the term that people have been using in LLM world, that like what are the moats, and the moats will become intellectual property, the moats will become institutional power, et cetera.
Yeah, and can I build off that?
Yeah, totally.
Well, like, and the emerging landscape around open AI models I think is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Like like in technology, there's always been this groundswell movement, right? There's like the free software movement back in the 70s and 60s, 70s and 80s. Like there's like Linux in particular being the sort of linchpin of an open source contribution. GitHub being the center of like open source development, and now Hugging Face is the center of AI model development. And it brings up all these questions. Like there are like how much knowledge and information needs to be embedded into a language model, right? And so OpenAI obviously believes like everything we've ever thought and said should be in like what is perceived on the other end of the interface as a single model. And I wonder if that's like even possible, and if it like, and right now it really reflects the bias that's pretty much on the internet. There are other, so then there's this question of like the role of a large language model. Should it be this all-knowing oracle, or should it be a kind of reasoning engine to help you traverse knowledge that is more bespoke? So like the RAG model that you mentioned, there are other architectures as well that are emerging. RAG is really hard, like to get it accurate, by the way. But like there are independent engineers working on this all the time. And that's the really encouraging part that I find. It's like people like a software engineer like loves this stuff. And they're like, you know what, in my spare time, I'm gonna go and build and contribute to this open source thing. And they are asking critical questions too. Like they don't want to be tied to OpenAI or Microsoft or Meta, things like that. And so hopefully there's a kind of movement there that creates the variety that we can all end up leveraging ourselves. And then I'm hoping the CDP students can get involved and help provide some opinions there too.
Totally. All right, well, we should probably close it there. Thank you, everyone, so much.